Hello, everybody. We are here today, just a few days removed from the Gran Turismo 7 1.49 update. And it's been quite a doozy so far. We've got new cars, a new track, and new physics, and new force feedback, new tires. There's so much. And I really wanted to get everybody on here to talk about this because there's a lot to go over. So I think the physics is probably the one thing that I'm most excited to talk about. So, Chaz, I know you did a lot of driving, preparing some of the videos that
Yeah.
we've published on here. So, what are your first thoughts on that?
To be honest, the first thing I thought was that the cars feel softer underneath you. Like previously, I joked when I first got back into Gran Turismo 7 and called it Understeer Simulator because it was just that the cars felt so stiff from when you were sat behind the wheel. But now they feel like they roll a little bit more. It feels like it's more connected to the surface of the road rather than just skimming along it. It feels like it really sinks in and it bites in there as well. But it also, at the same time, has become more savable. So if you have a slide, it's not as snappy in the other direction all the time. You can really glide the car around a corner. So in essence, it's become more rewarding to drive, I think, in the whole way that it's come together. I think they've done a really good job of it, in fairness.
And Andrew, I think you're probably of the three of us, you're probably the fastest driver
Well, that's
on
a
this
damning
call
indictment.
today.
No, I'd agree.
So, well, what do you think?
I mean, I'm not as fast as my imposter. I'm just kind of like a mid-grade B driver. But yes, no, it's been an interesting experience. I mean, I've only driven a couple of the cars. I've not had a chance to try that Monster Genesis yet, largely because it petrifies me.
It is terrifying.
Yeah, but I mean, I agree with what Chaz has said. There's certainly seems to be more of a focus on, I think, trail braking this time around. It seems to be a more effective technique for getting around corners. Um, there is there's been a few changes to the force feedback on various wheels as well. So I mean, some users are reporting how much they don't like it, but it seems to depend largely on what wheel you're using. I've had no particular issues with the Thrustmaster unit that I've got here. And I think Chaz uses the same wheel. I think you do as well, Jordan. I've not really found anything to pick at. It seems to be slightly more communicative. There seems to be more detail, more information coming through about the road surface. And yeah, I agree that the weight transfer does it feels more natural in most cases. Obviously, there's some fairly high profile occasions where it doesn't quite work that way, which I think we'll discuss in a minute. But for the most part, it seems to be a more intuitive, a more natural kind of feeling game.
Yeah, I
I think
agree. I'm
everything's
using
sped up a little bit as well.
I'm using the Fanatec DD Extreme.
Extreme.
And, yeah, the Extreme. And I did the same settings, all the exact same advanced settings, which we published an article about with the help of GT Planet user Perovic Boy. And we'll include a link to that article in the description of this video. But he's really, I consider him the expert of tuning these Fanatec wheels. And it's a great group of settings. And I found that all I had to do was adjust the max torque in game. I think I went up maybe one click, and it was remarkable to me. It almost felt like a different game with the DD Extreme. I couldn't believe well, I think you think you used the word softness, Chaz. I think there was actually I feel like I could tell what each individual tire is doing. In a way, it feels more intuitive. I feel like I have more control because I'm getting more information. And I've been reading our forums, and a lot of people are saying a lot of different things. And I wish I had room where I could just set up all these different wheels and just try one wheel after the other. I know with the Logitech G Pro, they have apparently nerfed the True Force feedback that is coming through there, but there are some changes that you can make to sort of bring that back. I wish I had my Logitech G wheel set up on my rig right now, because I would like to test that. But I think Polyphony's got to be careful here, because we've got this really expensive high-end Gran Turismo branded wheel, which feels amazing with the new physics, and then you have another very expensive wheel, but that one that doesn't carry the GT branding that maybe doesn't have the same impact with these new physics, and that's a little tricky. But I'm very curious now to see what the Fanatec Full Force feedback, which is sort of the true force for Fnatic. I'm very curious to see how that will add in with these new physics. That could be incredible. It could be an incredible update. I'm more excited for that now than ever.
I was going to say the main thing that we love about being able to race in the way that we do, regardless of what sort of game or sim that it's on, when you're simulating racing, is that we can all be on track together and everyone have such different hardware. But for developers and software developers in particular, when it comes to making a game that has to accommodate for all these companies and wheels and types and obviously different capabilities of the wheels as well. When you look at direct drives, I think some of the Simicube Pros that we get over on the likes of iRacing, they're nearly 30 Newton meters of torque. It's just stupid. You don't need that. But at the same time, a game and the software has to be able to tell it, yes, use all of that, but at the same time, tell a belt-driven wheel to use just 3 Newton meters instead. And obviously, the wheels that Andrew and I use are less powerful, and you will often find that it'll just go heavy mid-corner randomly, and it's not randomly as such, but you won't get as much detail and, like you say, feel what every tyre is doing. It'll just be heavy because it's the weight of the car naturally pushing against the steering wheel itself. So there is definitely a lot of complications that come with making it work. But I agree with what Andrew said. You get an idea now that it's not just going heavy in your hands. You can feel why it's doing that. You can feel lumps and bumps in it as well, based on how the tires are clipping a curb or just a little bit of the grass. And we've been doing a lot of that around Eiger as well. But it's having that detail makes such a difference to you as a driver, because we don't get the feeling in our backsides of what the car's doing. You have to do it audibly and visually, and that wheel is the only sort of physical movement side of figuring out what the car's doing.
Yeah, I was doing some Sophie races at various tracks before the update and after the update, because I wanted to use the same car, same wheel settings, same track, back to back. And racing side by side with Sophie is usually pretty good racing. And I found with the old version of the physics, it was, it's what I was used to, but it was what it was. And with the new physics, I felt like I could race closer to these other cars without contacting them. And I was able to thread the needle more intuitively between the other cars, because I felt like I had more control.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing. I get nervous when I'm doing sim racing, online racing, or at the Pro-Ams or wherever. Whenever you're really close to other drivers, other cars on track, because I think you're not getting as much of that information. But when you're in a real car, you can drive and race really close to other people much more easily, or I can. So I always find that close racing difficult in games. But now with these updated physics, I feel like I can do that with more confidence. I don't know where that comes from, but it does. Andrew, I know you usually play, or not usually, but you often play with the controller.
I do. I do usually play with the controller because I'm quite lazy. I will just pick up the controller and have a crack rather than lugging myself over to the rig. And the controller physics do also seem to be improved a little bit. There's more of a snatchy feel under the kind of the very last bit of braking. So actually, the first car I tried on the new physics was actually the Impreza at Eiger, and the first time I braked just as heavy as I normally would, it pitched left and had me in the barrier. So there does seem to be a little bit more of an effect with the weight transfer for that last bit of braking. But yeah, the controller is. Polyphony has always excelled on controller physics for the Gran Turismo games. It was probably never a question in my mind that the controller would be perfectly fine after the update as well. And yeah, it's again because I'm lazy, I will just pick it up and have a crack, and it's the same as it was before, but improved.
It's interesting you mentioned the sort of the trail braking earlier and the fact that it will break away under braking, because that's what we heard from Guy Barber as well. He was saying that particularly on the brakes, the cars are more difficult now, and he was always saying that, you know, the pros, obviously, they're pushing the limits of what the cars are doing grip-wise with their setups and everything. They run really aggressive setups to get as much rotation as they can, obviously as much braking performance as they can. But when mere mortals like ourselves get behind the wheel, we may not have experienced that, but we already have, with the simplest of just doing a lap round Eiger, for example. And it's good to see that it translates across multiple cars rather than just what those guys at the top are doing, because it's obviously the player base that is much more substantial in number than the guys that are the sort of few select ones at the very top of the order.
Yeah, and I think the physics feel great across the board. You know, I've tried some low-powered, you know, FF cars and some FR cars and some Group 3 cars. They all seem to feel better and more intuitive to drive to me, which I think is pretty impressive when you have a game that does cover such a wide spectrum of vehicles like Gran Turismo 7. That's hard to do. But going back to the force feedback, though, I will say with this DD Extreme wheel in particular, it is overdue, I think, for us to have these full force effects. I know when I made the review for that wheel and all that was coming out, that was sort of the narrative from Fanatec, is that this is coming very soon. You know, Polyphony says, "Oh, this is coming very soon," and now we are. Let's see, we're at least well over 6 months from that release. I've had the wheel longer than that.
Yeah.
And when you say that something is going to come out and it's an officially branded product, you do need to get it out eventually. And I think this would have been a good opportunity to roll that out. So that does need to come quickly, because I feel a little uncomfortable having recommended it and it's still not out yet. And that's a problem. That's a problem. But like you said, Chaz, I think having to support so many different types of hardware is probably a challenge. It's probably a technical challenge, because it's not just one dominant wheel like when we had in the Logitech G25 and G29 days. Now you do have these direct drive motors, which the API is probably quite different to that from these older belt driven wheels. And you know, you've got Thrustmaster and you've got the Logitech and you've got the Fanatec, and it's probably slowing down the development of force feedback, and that's probably a consequence of that. Speaking of development, I do think we have to talk about the hilarious bugs that have come out with this new physics update. I tell you, I've laughed so hard at these videos that have come out. It's just,
there's one particular shot that tickles me, and because I know I'm going to end up editing this video, I'm going to put it in here now with credit to the person from Twitter. But there's a shot of a Fiat 500 coming down from the sky at absolutely breakneck speeds and just slapping the floor and driving off as if nothing's happened. And it's one of the funniest things I've ever seen in a Gran Turismo game. But it's a shame why it's all come about. But at the same time, you know, people are slating it, saying, "Oh, I can't believe they've released it and done this and got this wrong." But at the same time, there's a decent balance, at least, of people just saying, "You know what? That's really funny. Let's just play with it." And people are embracing the fact that they can't get it right all the time, can they? And these things happen. You know, there's so many variables. Like you just rightly said, Jordan, you know, we've got all kinds of cars in this game from all stretches of the motoring world, and then we can modify them, do so much to them as well, and really mix up the different elements of them, like putting massive engines in camper vans, for God's sake. Like, you know, it's just to be able to get it right every time is a huge challenge. And on this occasion, they've not, but it still puts a smile on everyone's faces, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's the case of all publicity is good publicity. There's
yes.
A lot of these videos going out and people are, I mean, bursting out laughing. It is properly funny to watch. I mean, I imagine that it's mortifying on behalf of Polyphony Digital, and they are rushing to find a way to get it fixed. But it's been an enjoyable part of the game. It does appear to be some extreme edge cases where, as you say, you can put a massive engine into something that's not designed for it. Although obviously it is designed for it in this sense.
Yeah.
But winding up the suspension settings, and it's essentially going beyond the parameters of what the physics can handle. And it does seem to be a case of if you have a high horsepower going mainly to the rear wheels with some extremely stiff rear suspension settings, it causes these kind of jumping effects. And the AI, of course, has no way of mitigating it. So
No.
when you force the AI into driving these cars, they just go all over the place.
Yeah, one thing I will say, which I think is sort of interesting to note here, is if you think about it, this is the first major update to the game, especially with the game's physics, which is sort of I guess, it's kind of an under the radar type thing. Not under the radar, but it's something that would be difficult to test.
Yeah.
And this is the first major update where the first major update after a lot of the layoffs that happened at PlayStation.
True.
And the way it works internally, Polyphony developed the game, of course, but a lot of the QA testing and a lot of the QA testers, which I've had the privilege of meeting over the years with all my interactions at various Gran Turismo events, those are all PlayStation employees. And of course, I don't know the details of what departments suffered the most layoffs or that sort of thing. But I do know a lot of people that used to work at PlayStation that are no longer there. A lot of our contacts have been laid off within PlayStation. And I can't help but wonder if maybe some QA testers were not available and were not able to catch these sort of edge case bugs.
It's very true. It's very, very true. And the thing is, as well, is when something like that comes down to manpower, you need to be able to test so many eventualities in a game. And if you haven't got the manpower to do that and say to somebody, right, you're in charge of, messing with this engine swap in this car for this long, or these certain cars, for example, or however they may divide it, if it just comes down to one person less being available for that, that could be a big hole in the game, and they think, oh, it'll be all right because we've tested it on this or we've tested it on that, and we know that these results are similar and these parameters are similar. So, yeah, I think you could be onto something there. It's easily what's the word? It could easily go hand in hand, basically.
The QA testers as well, a lot of them would be specialists in Gran Turismo. So they would know exactly what sort of things to test and look out for. And that type of experience is really valuable in software testing.
Yeah, well, it's like there's an old story, isn't there, about a engineer that's trying to fix I think he's trying to fix a cruise ship or something, and they employ this guy in, and he comes along with just a tiny little hammer, and they said the engine's like seized up or something, and he spends like an hour walking around it and like touching the boat and listening to it and so on, and he just knocks it once with this tiny hammer, and then he charges them $50,000, and they're like, "What are you on about $50,000 for?" And he says, "Well, it's $1 for the damage that little knock's done to my hammer, and it's about 49,900 and so on for knowing exactly where to knock in that moment." It's that knowledge. You cannot put a price on it, can you?
That's true. That's a great analogy. So it'll be interesting. I have no doubts they'll fix it. But I think we've never really seen a bug like that. I mean, I know we've had major bugs, but those were sort of like server side stuff and incompatibilities in those areas with the earlier Gran Turismo 7 updates. But this is kind of unusual for a Gran Turismo game to see stuff like this, and that may be one explanation for it. But anyway, moving on, I do want to talk about Eiger, the new track, because this is sort of a track that comes from the Gran Turismo. I don't want to say the old days. This is sort of a middle-aged Gran Turismo history. It comes from this sort of middle age of Gran Turismo history, where you had the Gran Turismo HD. It sort of introduced a new era to the Gran Turismo franchise as we moved into high definition graphics, and I think a new Gran Turismo game engine of sorts that was really launched with Eiger and the PlayStation 3. I have a lot of memories playing this track in that Gran Turismo HD demo, and it brings back a lot of good memories, and I'm happy to see that they've done a pretty amazing job updating this track with Gran Turismo 7 in mind. Andrew, I know this is a track that you are very familiar with. What are your thoughts after driving it?
Well, I mean, not to make you feel old or anything, but it was 18 years ago now that Gran Turismo HD came out. And yeah, it was kind of like the point at which Gran Turismo became more experimental. Became more of a kind of an exploration of car culture title. I mean, obviously, we all have fond memories of GT1 through 4. In essence, they were sort of the same game in principle. I mean, obviously, GT4 added the photo mode. But kind of GTHD was the point at which it became more of an experimental title. And I think that was also the time where Yamauchi was talking about making it like a subscription model, an iRacing type thing, where you would get the base game, like HD itself. I've got a disc version just over there. You would get that and you would buy tracks and cars just like you do in iRacing or in Race Room or these similar PC titles. That's not something that obviously came to pass. We're now in this era where everybody's got the same game. We're getting all of the DLC is identical. It's free. So everybody's kind of got the same cars, the same tracks. GTHD was kind of that point at which the titles sort of became more of a vision rather than a game, I suppose. And yes, Eiger was the track that kind of heralded it in because it was the only circuit available in Gran Turismo HD. Now we've seen old title tracks coming back before to Gran Turismo 7, and there has been some controversy over the changes that have been made to Deep Forest, to Trial Mountain, to Grand Valley particularly. This is almost a one-to-one of Eiger Nordwand as it was in Gran Turismo HD. There's a couple of little subtle changes. I think possibly the most obvious one is the pit lane has been relocated from the very strange place that it was before, where it bypassed the hairpin section. It's now on the uphill drag. It's the tunnel that people loved, the open cut tunnel where you could see down the valley. That's actually now part of the pit lane, so the track route itself doesn't go through the tunnel anymore. And there was a little jump just after the start finish line, which I think there's still a little lip there, but it's been smoothed out, flattened off a little bit, probably with sport mode and the Gran Turismo World Series in mind. But more or less, it's a one-to-one thing. I mean, I've crashed in exactly the same place that I did in Gran Turismo HD 18 years ago, so it's pretty close.
I was going to say that little jump that you mentioned is still definitely place enough to have a colossal accident in the Genesis, as I did many times trying to record that first gameplay video. Every single lap, I didn't want to come across as soft by lifting or braking for that jump. If you stay flat, you're going in a wall. It just spits you one way or the other when you land. It's just
got 1,500 horsepower. What do you expect?
Exactly, yeah. You cannot stay pinned. It's just an accident. It's a good thing that you can't go through those tiny little tape barriers and just go off the edge of the cliff, because there'd be just a pile of my Genesis just at the bottom of the hill by the end of it. There's actually a little sort of crash bloopers that I've recorded of me trying to do that gameplay video as well, actually. So I'll pop that in somewhere at some point on our channel, and you can all laugh at me. It may just be a short or something, I don't know. But it's great fun circuit to drive, though, isn't it? It's just awesome fun. And like you say, after we've spent so long looking at the original from Gran Turismo HD, it's great to see that they appreciate the nostalgia at Polyphony just as much as the player base do. So they've stuck to that and given us as much of that as they can, and it's just been great to see it.
Yeah, it really has. To me, it almost felt like, when you visit a place in your childhood and you have a certain memory of it, and then maybe you go back to that place 18 years later,
Absolutely,
and you see all these little details and things feel instantly familiar, but also they're more vivid now because little details that you forgot or didn't notice when you were younger now stick out to you. And that's kind of what it felt like coming back to Eiger with this new Gran Turismo 7 update. You see more flowers, and you see more textures on the inside of the S's, and all those switchback turns. And there's all these little things, and I'm like, I know those weren't there in the old games, but that's just sort of the way it feels. Especially playing the game in VR, which is quite an experience. And, and we've got that video on our channel here. But it's really something. And the reverse version of the track too, which I hate. I love the forward version. I've always hated the reverse version of Eiger.
I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah,
because I hate it as well.
It's so bad going up the hill. With all those switchbacks, I can never get it right. I hate the reverse version, but it was funny. My first time going through the reverse version, I understeered and I went straight into the tunnel and straight into the pits.
Fantastic.
And I was like,
Easy
okay,
to do.
this is different. This is a little different here.
Yeah, that's going to take over from Special Stage Route X with the whole
Yes.
force the other players into the pit lane.
Oh,
thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it will. Yeah.
Yeah,
Can't wait
that's
for
gonna
that
be
on
a
the daily
legitimate
races.
strategy for sure. But I am glad to see it back.
Yeah.
For sure. It's a classic. So the cars in this update, I know you guys have driven more of the new cars than I have, so I'll defer to you guys for this bit. Chaz, you've definitely driven a lot with the videos that we've made. What's your favorite one of the bunch?
I want to preface by saying the Ferrari is horrendous to drive. But to be fair, I love the 430 Scuderia. I love the Ferrari F430. I think it's one of the most beautiful cars I've ever made. But because it's so lightweight and it's so track focused, I just don't think it suits Eiger. It really doesn't suit Eiger. It feels like there's zero engine braking, and because of the weight transfer and obviously the mid-engine instability that it naturally comes with, it just doesn't suit that circuit at all. Makes a great noise, but that's about it. I enjoyed how stable the Lamborghini was because I expected very similar to the Ferrari. You know, they're similar layout cars, but the Lamborghini feels a bit heavier and chunkier, feels a lot smoother to drive. The one I had the most fun with actually was the BMW M3 because it's got enough power to spin up the rears and kick out the back end a little bit. But because of the new physics, you can now save it. You can slide the car for a long time rather than just lob the lock on and just point it the right way to save it. You can sort of float with the car around the corner, and it's just a great laugh because of that. And if you do want to try and drive conventionally and do a quick lap, you're not at massive risk by keeping it pinned everywhere because it's not got all the power in the world. The Genesis is terrifying, absolutely terrifying, but brilliant fun when you get it right. And the Subaru, to be fair, it's an interesting one because it feels rapid through the corners and it feels very planted as you'd expect it to, you know. But again, because it's got this sort of lack of power, doesn't feel like it goes anywhere up the hill, especially at Eiger. That's when you really feel like that's when you remember that rally cars are not as well, especially back then, they weren't as fast as everybody made out. And it's an interesting one to drive. Good fun, but just it feels absolutely gutless when it goes up the hill. So I'd say the BM. The BM's a good riot, to be fair, and it's nice and soft because of the new physics.
Andrew, what about you?
So I've only had a chance to drive a few of them because I foolishly let my my Gran Turismo 7 bank balance shrink a little bit more than I should have done. So I've not driven the Genesis yet.
Oh, everyone slates me in the videos, by the way, saying I've paid for all them credits because I've got like 20 million. But I spent like 3 days after the last update doing loads of circuit experiences. So that's where I got them from.
I've not done any time trials in a while because I've not found ironically the time to do it. So I've not been able to keep my bank balance up. But I've not driven the Genesis, but I drove the original, and I found it a bit speed 12y, which good and bad, but good. So the an extra 400 horsepower kind of scares the life out of me, but I'm sure I'll get around to it eventually. The Lamborghini, I actually never enjoyed it in previous games, but I'm actually finding it's quite good fun. I did the weekly challenge in it this week with the special liveries and the special event, and I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. The Scooby obviously is a cracker. Under BOP, the power actually goes up quite a fair bit because the Group B category in the game is a little bit weird, a little bit uneven. So it's actually got like 130 horsepower more than a standard. I haven't experienced the Ferrari yet, but I think on your recommendation, I'll avoid it. The roof, actually, that was one of the cars that intrigued me the most about this update because I think it's the first time that we've seen in Gran Turismo 7 a Porsche-based roof actually come into the game since the Portioning, the time where Porsche had this exclusive agreement with, I think it was EA. So now I've completely forgotten. And since kind of like the end of that, we've seen Porsche coming in droves. The only roof we've seen since then is a CTR3, which is a car that roof actually, I mean, it is based on Porsche components, but it's a car that roof essentially builds by itself. It's a a custom vehicle that isn't actually directly related to any existing Porsche chassis. So the RGT coming in, which is the 991 generation GT3 analog, ordinarily with a manual box, this one has a PDK, which is a bit weird. There's only a couple of those out there. That's a car that intrigued me because I just wasn't expecting it, and it's terrific. I mean, I always enjoyed the previous generation RGT from previous Gran Turismo games. This one right up there with them. What's that? Oh, the M3, of course. I forgot about the M3.
See, I kept forgetting about the roof, and whereas you forgot about the M3.
Yeah, that's sparked a bit of controversy, actually, because a lot of people have been picking on how it looks. It's interesting that there is something to it that's obviously completely undrivable because the kidney grill.
It's broken.
Yeah, just the kidney grill is slightly wonky, possibly, and the tail lights. When you're not on track they're fine. When you're not on track, they seem to be a little bit too transparent. A lot of people are complaining about that, but the car itself is, as you say, it's scary to think of an M3 now these days as being underpowered, but it doesn't have a lot of power, and it is quite good fun to drive because not much power, not much weight, unlike the new M5, which has just been revealed.
Oh God!
Bends light around it because it's so heavy. It's a fun little. An M3 is little. It's a fun front engine, rear wheel drive, not much power. It's a cracking little steer.
Well, on that note, I think we need to wrap this up because I really want to go play Gran Turismo 7.
You need to drive the rest of the cars.
Yeah,
and get behind the wheel.
I will say that this update, I feel like I'd kind of stopped playing Gran Turismo 7 a lot because I felt like I knew what it was. I sort of, the cars all felt different, obviously, but they all felt like they were within a certain range. It was very predictable. So I knew what I was going to get. And yeah, I would still play the game, and I would, want to have fun and set better lap times and stuff. But it felt like it was sort of in a box. I knew exactly what I was going to get. Yeah. Now with these new physics, it's so much more alive. Like I said earlier, it actually kind of feels like a new game, and I want to go revisit a lot of cars. I haven't driven the Nürburgring yet with the new physics. I really want to see how that feels with these new details, and I want to try some of these cars. So a very big update, a very pleasant surprise, I think, at this point in the game's lifespan. I'm surprised that they would actually do this kind of an update. They may never do it again, considering the bugs that it introduced.
Yeah, true.
But
we'll miss it. When they're gone, we'll miss it.
We will.
Yep. So yeah, that's Gran Turismo 7 1.49. Quite an interesting summertime refresh. I hope we'll get some more cars later in the year. Usually there's some bigger updates around Christmas time. Ahead of the World Finals, of course, which will be here before we know it. But interesting times in the world of Gran Turismo. But thank you all for watching. Let us know what you guys think about the physics. Agree, disagree, force feedback. Let us know what you think in the comments or the forums. And we'll see you guys next time.